Welcome to Spruce Grove Alliance Church, your home.
Well, as we head towards the most important holiday on the Christian calendar, not Christmas, Easter, where we remember the cross and the resurrection of our Lord and Savior Jesus Christ, we are preparing our hearts by contemplating Jesus' last words, his famous last words in John 13 to 17. Every year, I like to do a series leading up to Easter just to get our hearts ready for this most important event on the Christian calendar. In my first year here, we did a series called Worthy, and we looked at the different offices that Jesus had. You might remember it if you're with us, of prophet, priest, and king. And last year, we did a series called Richer Than You Think, looking at the riches that are available to us through the cross of Christ. And we looked at this thing called the atonement language, and words like redemption and propitiation and justification and reconciliation and the like, of what the cross accomplishes for us. Well, this year, I've decided that it's time, as we head into the most important event on the Christian calendar, Easter, to focus on the last words that Jesus said to his disciples the night before he goes to the cross. And this is some intimate conversation. I saw this TikTok video that was in my algorithm, and it was of this father that received a voicemail from his son. His son was a soldier. And the son had recorded this voicemail for his father in the event that he didn't come home, and he paid the ultimate sacrifice. And they played this for him, and it's obviously very emotional. But the thing about this 2-minute clip is it's deeply intimate, it's deeply personal, and it's void of all the superfluous fluff that we talk about in our conversation, like weather and how the Oilers are doing and how they're going to do in the playoffs. It was right to the point, get right to the heart of the matter. And John 13 to 17, Jesus' famous last words is just that. Not to say that anything that Jesus said was kind of superfluous fluff, but he gets really intense and really personal, and he wants to communicate to his disciples some very important things before he goes to the cross, and ultimately, in a few days after that, he ascends to the Father. Pastor Karen rightly pointed out 2 weeks ago that John chapters 1 through 12 covers about 3.5 years of Jesus' public ministry. Then when you get to chapter 13 to 17, those 5 chapters, John slows the narrative down. And you could say that covers about 3.5 hours the night before he goes to the cross. 3.5 years versus 3.5 hours. There's some important things in here. And Pastor Karen 2 weeks ago launched this series excellently as she talked about John chapter 13, where Jesus modeled the Jesus way for his disciples. He made himself nothing, and he washed his disciples' feet, and he encouraged them to take that posture in their life and do the same. Do those same Jesus way things with their life. And today, we're going to look at John chapter 15, one of my favorite chapters in the whole entire Bible. And we are going to see Jesus' famous metaphor of the vine and the branches. We just sang about that, abide in me or remain in me. That's where that song came from. And we are going to contemplate one of the most revolutionary things that Jesus said in the flesh while he was God. A couple weeks ago, I was in Thailand, and I was at the global gathering. I went there for about a week, and as I mentioned last week, quite a few IWs, about 200 IWs from around the world gathered in Thailand for a time of fellowship and prayer and worship. And our Soli team, 5 of them, went to Soli Island for about 2 weeks before that, and then they met my wife and I in Thailand, and we drank from a fire hose as we learned what God was doing in the world. And on the tail end of the trip, we took about 2 days to kind of decompress and rest and reflect. And that's something very important to do if you go overseas on a missions trip, by the way. to have a Sabbath rest on the tail end before you come back into North America craziness, to just reflect on everything that you've learned, because you're drinking from a fire hose for weeks on end, and every sense, all the five senses are just on extreme overload as you're just experiencing all these different things. And it's important to take like a day or two just to calm down, just to let the waters settle and just reflect on what God is teaching you. And so that's what we did, and we spent the morning about 3 hours laughing and crying, and I heard stories from Soli, and we wove in things that we talked about in the global gathering, and we had some light bulb moments, and we were writing stuff down as we were even planning with what we were going to say here on that Sunday morning last Sunday. And that's what we did in the morning. In the afternoon, we decided that we were going to do something that furthered our reflection about what God is doing in the world. And if you didn't know this, Buddhism is a very prominent religion in Thailand. And we decided to take a trip into nearby Chiang Mai, which is a population of about 1.7 million. And in this old city, they had 3 major, beautiful, magnificent Buddhist temples. And we decided that we were going to pay a tour guide to take us on this journey through these Buddhist temples, because we could just kind of look at it and not know what it means. But we decided to all pool our money and pay someone $50 to take us on a tour around these 3 big Buddhist temples in downtown Chiang Mai. And this lady, she spoke English quite well, but she spoke really fast, and so we could pick up about 60 to 70% of what she was saying. And she had done it. She said she did this 2 of these a day, and so she had her kind of routine down pat, and she pointed this and pointed that out and pointed that out. And we're obviously, from a Christian perspective, looking at all of the things that she's telling us, and kind of reading it through that lens. And she said something that triggered every single one of our hearts, because when we reflected on it later, we said that's different than Christianity. She said something one time, they said it a second time, then she said it a third time. Then we said, whoa, that is very distinct from Christianity. And the thing that she said that made our eyebrow raise as she was talking about all the Buddhism and the religion was this. When she was talking about Buddha, she said, I know him, but he doesn't know me. And she would ramble on and talk about these 3 laws that Buddha had, and how we were supposed to follow them. And if we followed them, then hopefully it would pan out in the end, because this Buddha God is untouchable. He's beyond us. And hopefully if I live my life just right, that it'll all pan out in the end. And she kept saying this over and over again, like, I know this God, I know him, but he doesn't know me. And in these temples, you had a lot of opportunity to give money. And I took a picture of this one, that it makes your fate and your life better. Trying to gain the attention of this impersonal God who lives in another world, religion that's void of relationship with their God. And Jesus, the night before he goes to the cross, says something so revolutionary that sets Christianity apart from every other religion in the world. He looks at his disciples and he says this, you are my friends. I no longer call you servants, because a servant doesn't know his master's business. Instead, I've called you friends. For everything I've learned from the Father, I've made known to you. A relationship with God through Jesus Christ is the one thing that sets Christianity apart from every other religion in the world, that you can have a personal relationship with God through Jesus Christ. And friendship is about vulnerability. Friendship is about sharing those deep things in your life with someone else. And Jesus says to his disciples, I haven't let anything back. Everything that the Father has told me, I've poured into you. It's not like a servant-master relationship where you're at a need-to-know basis. I just give you information at a need-to-know basis. I've let you into the deepest parts of my heart. Everything that the Father has told me, I have told you. I call you friends. And that's the one thing that sets Christianity apart from every other religion in the world. Not, I know that God, but that God doesn't know me. And Jesus in John chapter 15, he presses in to help his disciples understand this union, this friendship that he wants to have with them after he leaves this earth. And he uses this metaphor of the vine and the branches. Right before this verse we're going to read in John 15, it said, Jesus says to his disciples, "Come now, let us leave." So he's at the Last Supper, and then theologians assume he goes to this place called the Garden of Gethsemane. And the Garden of Gethsemane is where this famous scene, we usually talk about it on Monday, Thursday, or Good Friday, where you remember the scene where the disciples are off praying by themselves and they fall asleep, and Jesus is off praying by himself, and then sweat drops of blood. Remember that story? That's when that happens. So he goes to the Garden of Gethsemane, near the Temple Mount, just looking across to the Temple Mount, looking over at Calvary where he's going to go to the cross, and he's trying to help his disciples understand this union, this friendship that he wants to, how close he wants them to be to him and how he to them. And he comes up with this metaphor as he's in the garden of the vine and the branches. Let's read this deeply intimate heart-to-heart he has with his disciples. "I am the vine. My Father is the gardener. He cuts off every branch in me that bears no fruit, and every branch that does bear fruit, he prunes so that it will be even more fruitful. You are already clean because of the word I have spoken to you. Remain in me." See if you can count how many times he says remain in me, or another way to say it is abide in me. "As I also remain in you. No branch can bear fruit by itself. It must remain in the vine. Neither can you bear fruit unless you remain in me. I am the vine and you are the branches. If you remain in me and I in you, you will bear much fruit. Apart from me, you can do nothing. If you do not remain in me, you're like a branch that is thrown away and withers. Such branches are picked up and thrown into the fire and burned. If you remain in me and my words remain in you, ask whatever you wish, and it will be done for you. This is to my Father's glory that you bear much fruit, showing yourselves to be my disciples. As the Father has loved me, so have I loved you. Now remain in my love. If you keep my commandments, you will remain in my love, just as I have kept my Father's commandments and remain in his love. I have told you this so that my joy may be in you and that your joy may be complete. My command is this: love each other as I've loved you. Greater love has no one than this, to lay down one's life for one's friends. You are my friends if you do what I command. I no longer call you servants because a servant does not know his master's business. Instead, I have called you friends. For everything that I've learned from the Father, I have made known to you. You did not choose me, but I chose you and appointed you that you might go and bear fruit that will last, so that whatever you ask in my name, the Father will give you. And this is my command: love each other. This is completely revolutionary. That Jesus looks at his disciples and he says, "You are my friend." The night before he goes to the cross, he's in the garden and he's trying to figure out this illustration that he could use to show how close he wants to be to his disciples upon his departure. And he comes up with this metaphor of this vine and the branches. And ironically, Jesus here is calling us to the two values that we talked about this fall, the two values that you might remember that our elders established back last spring, and then we talked about them last fall in a series called This Is Us. On our 6 values that flow from our threefold mission statement: knowing Jesus, knowing one another, and making Jesus known. Jesus here is pushing the envelope on intentional proximity, stay close to me, and transformational discipleship. That as you stay close to me, I want to change some things about you. And he uses this phrase over and over and over again. Remain in me, 11 times in this passage. Remain in me as I may remain in you. Stay close to me. And he uses this image of grafting. You might remember that we used this on the very last sermon as we contemplated Jesus' best sermon ever, and the Sermon on the Mount. And we talked about how there's this concept of grafting where you take a branch and you can put it into a rootstock and it'll start to grow and bear fruit. And so this image of remaining in, of staying in Jesus and receiving all of his eternal nourishment, the roots of his eternal nourishment inside of us. Jesus has already said here, I have given you everything that the Father has told me, and I want you to stay in me, and I'm going to stay in you. It's a beautiful picture of this relationship, of this friendship. Because Jesus knew the tendency for us in our lives to withdraw from the vine and find our substance in other places. When I was young, baseball was my sport. I thought I was going to play Major League Baseball. My parents didn't want to put me in hockey or football or any of those other expensive sports, so I played baseball in the summer. And the Blue Jays were my team. I grew up in Nova Scotia, and the Blue Jays, they were Canada's team, and so they were my team. And I could name for you all of these athletes that I had watched on TV from the early 80s. Maybe some of you remember these players. I could go around the ball diamond and name Fred McGriff, Nelson Liriando, Tony Fernandez, Kelly Gruber, George Bell, Lloyd Mosby, Jesse Barfield, Ernie Witt, Dave Steeb, the pitcher, Tom Hinkie. Tell me some of you remember these guys. These were my Connor McDavids. These were the guys that were untouchable for me. These were the guys that I saw on TV and that I wanted to be someday, and I would love to meet them someday. Well, when we were about 12 years old, our family, we took a vacation to Toronto, which I know Toronto is east from there, but we had to travel about 16 hours west from Nova Scotia to go to Toronto. And of course, baseball was our thing, and we got tickets to go what was called the Sky Dome then. I think it's called the Rogers Place now, right beside CN Tower. And we had tickets to 3 games, and it was kind of like the best vacation we'd ever been on. And so we got there early because we wanted to take it all in, and we wanted to go take in the batting practice that was before the game. And I walked out onto the kind of to the field, and not on the field, but as you step out into the Sky Dome, it's just this awe-inspiring moment as you see the CN Tower, and you see all these guys that I had seen on TV in batting practice. And what we wanted to do was go down on the third base line, and we could maybe catch some grounders and get a free souvenir if a ball came our way during batting practice. And there was about 20 of us along there, and I had my baseball glove because I was ready, but I never did catch a ball. But at the end of the batting practice, there was this guy in the outfield named Glenn Allen Hill. He played for I think, center field for the Blue Jays. And he had just caught a ball, and they were just tearing down the batting cage and getting ready to play the game. And I screamed out from the sidelines, Glenn Allen Hill, throw me the ball. And you'll never guess, the most amazing thing happened. Glenn Allen Hill from center field looked at me, and he acknowledged my existence. And he took the ball that he had just caught from his glove, and he did this. He threw the ball, and it was like slow motion. I'm like, no way. This ball is trickling towards me. And of course, everyone is trying to gather towards it. The big older guy comes in, and he grabs the ball in front of me. But it didn't matter. It doesn't matter. It's all right. I'm okay. I'm okay. I was on cloud 9 because Glenn Allen Hill threw a ball to me. I mean, this guy lived in another world. He was set apart. He was something beyond me. And if he had come over to me that day and said, hey, you want to be friends? I think my heart would have stopped. Jesus says to his disciples, you did not choose me, but I chose you. The God of the universe, who lives beyond us, who's set apart from us, who lives in another world beyond us, says, I chose to be your friend. We need to understand the enormous privilege that we have as believers to have a relationship with God himself. That he chose us. Not I know him, but he doesn't know me. He's so far beyond me that I can never know him, and he's out there. And no. The enormous privilege Jesus wants us to understand that we can have a relationship with God through Jesus Christ. That if you have accepted Jesus Christ as your personal Lord and Savior and his work done for you on the cross, that you can have what Paul talks about in Colossians chapter 1, this deep mystery, Christ in you, the hope of glory. And you can have this friendship, the privilege of this friendship from this God from another world. I was going up to my study the other day, and the teenagers, our seniors ministry meets on Wednesday here in the morning, and they sing the old hymns, and all these old hymns I remember from church growing up, and every once in a while I'll kind of stop, and it'll perk my memory and interest of what God had done in the past in my life. And I remember going by there, it was probably quite a few weeks ago, and they were singing this song, "What a Friend We Have in Jesus." What a friend we have in Jesus. All our griefs to bear. What a privilege to carry everything to God in prayer. Oh, what joy we often forfeit. Oh, what I can't even read what that says, but just the privilege that we have to have a relationship with God. And if that's too old for you, there's this brand new song by Brandon Lake, which I absolutely love, which is on my playlist. Just Start Talking to Jesus. Where he talks about how he had witnessed his grandmother praying, and then he had his child come into his room when he was worshiping, and he taught her how to talk to Jesus. And then he says, it's not very hard. Just start talking to Jesus as if he's your friend. And if you want to know where to begin when it comes to remaining in, to abiding in, to staying in Jesus, just start talking to Jesus. Just tell him right now, even what's on your heart, your worries, your fears, your failures, your struggles, everything, the small details of your life. Just start talking to Jesus. That's what it means to remain in him. And let him talk to you. And then there's this prayer promise that he has in here, if you noticed it. If you remain in me, and my words remain in you, all that nourishment from the Father giving inside of us, ask whatever you wish and it will be done for you. And then he goes on later on, he says, so that whatever you ask in my name, the Father will give you. Now, this isn't a promise that God is just a genie in a bottle and you just get to make all these wishes and God's going to give you whatever you want. But if you notice that as we are in relationship with Jesus and we're in harmony with him, we become one with him, we're going to pray things that are in line with the heart of God. You're going to start praying more and more as you remain in him and his words remain in you. Your kingdom come. A number of years ago, I pray for my family. I pray for everyone. I tell you, I pray every single day. There's this daily prayer covering for my kids. I pray for my family. I pray all the time. And I used to pray prayers for my kids that were along the lines of comfort and safety and comfort. Oh, God, keep them safe, help them have all the things they need in life. And then as I remained in Jesus and as I started to have his words remain in me, my prayers started switching for my kids. Where over the past few years, I've stopped praying safety and comfort for my kids. Yes, their daily needs, absolutely. But instead, I'm starting, first of all, to pray that God would continue to allow them to follow him, that they would continue to follow Jesus. But then God placed upon my heart this thing that he wanted me to pray for my kids, that my kids would scare me in my flesh with the things that they wanted to do for Jesus. That's a very different prayer, isn't it? Than comfort and safety. That first of all, that God, you would enable them to continue to follow you, but that they would follow you so much that in my flesh that I would be terrified of the things that they want to do for you. Just start talking to Jesus. Remain in me, and his words are going to remain in you. But you've noticed that in parallel dynamic, he also tells us that we need to, as we stay in union with him, that there's something else that's going to happen. It's going to lead to this transformational discipleship. As we stay close to him, we're going to be changed. And God is compared to this gardener. I am the vine and my Father is the gardener. He cuts off every branch in me that bears no fruit, while every branch that does bear fruit, he prunes that it will be even more fruitful. And this is to my Father's glory, that you bear much fruit, showing yourselves to be my disciples. And the fruit is simply following the Jesus way. If you notice in the text there, it's about keeping his commandments, about loving and serving one another and following the example of Jesus washing feet, and we become little Christs, Christians on this earth when we follow the Jesus way. And it's this picture of this father who's a gardener who wants to cultivate more of this change in this Jesus way in our life. But sometimes we create this picture of God that he's okay with us to stay the same, but really he's all about our transformation. Okay, here we go. I've been sitting on this for months now, and I need to talk about this. You know me as a pastor. I'm not one of those rock-throwing sheeps. I feel like there's a lot throwing it at other sheep. I feel like there's a lot of stuff coming our way as a church that we don't need to do that. But Jesus also calls us to, in the Sermon on the Mount, when we see people saying false things about God, false ideas about God, false prophets, that we need to call them out on that. There is this Christian song, Christian, and I put this lightly in quotation marks, on Shine FM, that's, I think, was number 1 in the charts last fall. And last night I even heard it on the radio again. I think it was number 5 in the countdown. And every time I hear this, it is complete nails on the chalkboard for me, because it is complete opposite of the way the Bible teaches us the way we're supposed to think about God. By the way, maybe you should know this as well, is that contemporary Christian music, CCM, it's called, is not owned and operated anymore by Christians. It's owned by a secular company. So they're about selling what you will buy, not necessarily what is theologically accurate. So sometimes those aren't the same. Sometimes they are, sometimes they're not. So that means we need to kind of analyze very carefully some of the words from these songs. I'm not going to throw the baby out with the bathwater. There's some really solid Christian songs that we even sang today, but it's not owned by Christians. So they're just more concerned about what you will buy, not necessarily more your heart more than God's heart. Does that make sense? But there's a song, it's called The Truth, the sheer irony of this. And it's by Megan Woods. And it goes like this: the truth is, and the chorus, I won't dissect the whole song, but this one thing just irks me. It's nails on the chalkboard for me, and I drive my family nuts because I start yelling at the radio when this comes on. The truth is, the truth. I was made in the image of a perfect king. He looks at me and wouldn't change a thing. And that's the truth. Oh, that is nails on the chalkboard for me. And I can understand if you feel worthless and you need to be told that God loves you. And I know the artist is trying to push the emotional buttons on this, but this is what we call therapeutic deism, pushed by progressive Christianity, where God exists to help me feel good about myself, and God is always affirming everything about me all the time. I was made in the image of a perfect king. God looks at me and wouldn't change a thing. Okay, let's do some Bible study here for a moment. We are made in the image of a perfect king, Genesis 1 and 2, which means that we have a soul, that we have, distinct from anything else in all of creation, the ability to have a relationship with God. That's Genesis 1 and Genesis 2. But Genesis 3, what happens? Sin enters in the world. And then God looks at us, and he has to change everything. That's why he had to send Jesus. That's why he had to do the sacrificial system, so that he looks at us and has to change everything. This is the whole process of sanctification. Yes, our position in Christ, God looks at us and sees Jesus, but he wants to change and transform us in the image of his Son. God looks at us and he wants to change everything. And that's the truth. And the irony is that if we think that if we can make God into our own image, and we have this therapeutic deism understanding of God, that we'll have true joy. But what did Jesus say in this text? I have told you this so that my joy might be in you and that your joy might be complete. Joy does not happen when we make God into our own image, when we just say, God affirms everything about me. No, joy happens when we submit ourselves to this transformational process and God changes us into the image of his Son and he changes everything about us. That's when joy truly happens. God looks at me and wants to change everything. I don't know how you can read the Bible, and especially this text, and say God looks at me and wouldn't change a thing. Here we have God is this farmer in this text who's not indifferent to his crop. He just didn't plant it and say whatever. He wants more Jesus way fruit out of us. And he's going to take those branches, as we read, that are producing some Jesus way fruit and make them even more fruitful. And he's going to take those branches that aren't producing any Jesus way fruit and he's going to cut them off. That's a lot of change and that's a lot of transformation. God looks at us and he wants to change everything. The one thing that I've learned working in apple orchards, as I've told you, I've worked many summers there, is that pruning is a very drastic exercise. Often people hear that I have done stuff with apples and they'll tell me that they have apple trees and they tell me they have an old fruit tree on their property and they want me to come prune it. And it's been left for about 10 years. And I ask them this question, do you want a decorative tree or do you want a fruitful tree? Because you can't have both. Because by the time I'm done with it, it's going to look like I've completely punished the tree. I remember working in the orchards, and we used to work with this old variety called spies, an old variety that doesn't exist anymore. But when a spy their branches will go straight up. And when you prune a tree, you want to have kind of one main leader and then about 5 or 6 other branches with lots of room, with lots of sunlight and air that can get in. But these branches will grow up like this. And so what we needed to do is we needed to tie down these branches. And we couldn't pull them straight down because they would break off. But so what we would do is we would take this branch that was up like this and we would kind of twist it and turn it. And we could hear all these small breaks that would happen in the branch. We would take a rope to the end of the branch and tie it to the base of the tree. And then we would leave it there for about 2 months. And every single one of those breaks would heal. And then the branches would go straight instead of straight up. But it felt like we were just punishing the trees. You're breaking the arms of this tree. And that's what pruning feels like. It feels drastic. It feels like when God wants to change and transform us into the image of his Son, sometimes it's painful. And it looks like he's punishing us, but that's not the case. He's transforming us. Are there some dead things that God needs to cut from your life? And are there things that you need to let God prune in your life? There was this kid in my youth group, his name, many years ago when I was a youth pastor, his name was David. David, I was there for 8 years, and he was the last 3 years, or he was in his grade 10, 11, and 12 year in some of my first few years there. David had autism. And I'm not an expert on autism. I know it's a really big umbrella, and there's all these different varieties. And but he would come to youth group, and I loved it because our whole kids embraced him in the youth group. And we would have these Bible studies on Sunday night, and he would come, and he wouldn't say a whole lot until the very end. And he had this ability, and the youth group just grew to love it. And it just warmed my heart as a youth group because they brought him into the discussion. That at the very end, he kind of spoke with this prophetic bluntness as he would summarize everything that was said, and he would just kind of say it as it is, maybe even sometimes void of any emotional intelligence, but it was good. It was amazing. He would come to the end of a Bible study, he would say things like, you don't have to feel that way, God loves you. Or he would say things like, I know it seems out of control, but you can trust God because he's in control. And everyone, because of the study we had studied, it was like the obvious answer, but he would state the Captain Obvious answer, and it was very prophetically blunt. And he would say things, we shouldn't do that because God doesn't like that. And the youth group almost would look forward to every time David would, at the very end, after we'd have all this discussion about our thoughts and feelings on the topic, and he would kind of like speak to the moment. And by the way, if you have one of those unique children, they are very important gift to the kingdom. Don't underestimate that. God has given you a special responsibility to cultivate that. But 8 years of youth ministry there, we'll get back to David in a second. God called me to go to seminary. So I'd done college before. I was a youth pastor at Briarcrest, and then I was 8 years a youth pastor, and then I went back and did my master's, and I did 3 years in that. And then God called me to serve in a church just an hour away in New Brunswick from where I was a youth pastor. I was there 4 years, and I went through one of the most painful seasons of my life. And it was pruning, and it felt like punishment, and it was pretty drastic. And I remember going to this on a personal retreat on the south shore of Nova Scotia, and my parents had this little cottage there, and I went and visited this old Bible camp that I used to attend. And it was desolate and all run down. And I remembered as I walked through there, this once vibrant place. And I remember thinking, this feels like me. I felt like once vibrant, and now I'm feeling desolate. And I had to pull away for a season and do kind of a forced sabbatical and pull away from ministry for a number of months. And it was deeply painful. And it was going to cause us to actually have to move. And as I was going to counseling as well, my counselor encouraged me to journal all of my thoughts and feelings, not every day, but just start writing this down. And I picked up the journal this past week, and I wrote it from the perspective for my son, who was young at the time, because I knew he wasn't going to understand everything that I was going through, and that someday I might have to give this to him, or I'd give this to him at a time where he was like going through a painful thing himself. And I actually threw a Post-it note on it when I went to Thailand, just in case I didn't come back, so that if somebody found my stuff, they'd give it to him. True story. But I found this quote in there where I said, there are two streams flowing in my heart right now, pain and trust. It was a deeply painful time, but I was trusting God in the midst of that. And like I said, I was about an hour away from where I was a youth pastor, and so we decided to go attend church at the place where I was a former youth pastor, because that was going to be a place of healing. And this is where David comes in. I was talking one day in the foyer to David's mom, who was a deeply godly woman. And I put her part of my prayer team of healing on this. And I was talking to her in the foyer, and I started leaking profusely from my eyes. And she pulled me into a back kind of closet, and she started praying over me and speaking into me. And then she said this, I told David a little bit of your story about what you're going through. And you know what he said? His prophetic bluntness. He said, this is going to make Brent a better pastor. And I didn't feel it at the time, but I knew it deep down. That God was going through that moment. He was cutting out things in my life that were not Jesus' way. And he was taking the branches of my life that were producing some Jesus' way fruit, and he was making them more fruitful. Now that I go back and I read that journal, I was like, wow, he was right. Are there some dead things that God needs to cut out of your life? Some things that aren't producing any Jesus' way fruit? Or is there some things that you need to let him prune? It's a painful process, but you know how you go endure it? It's certainly not from an understanding of God that I know him, but he doesn't know me. No. It comes from this profound and deep understanding that Jesus told his disciples at the Last Supper, you are my friend.
Thanks for listening to this week's message from Spruce Grove Alliance Church. For more information or to hear past messages, please visit sgac.net.